Fantastic. Good to see you all. Welcome to our webinar this evening, Jesus, a fresh look for extraordinary times. This is the first time we've done this kind of Bible study webinar experience, and we're so glad that you're here with us. I have some friends with me today, and these are folks from the community in which I serve. I should introduce myself. I'm Dale Suggs, and I'm the pastor of Beloved San Diego. Beloved San Diego is a Christian community. We like to call ourselves a movement. And our core values, we practice extravagant grace, radical inclusion, and relentless compassion. That's at the core of who we are. And I'm so glad that you're here to be a part of this 1 hour discussion. And I've chosen this topic for our inaugural time together as a live broadcast because I believe passionately that at this moment in time, Jesus' message and the way he lived his life is more relevant than ever before. In the midst of a pandemic, with the polarization of our country and the experience of this growing sense of frustration and despair, which has become a wave of emotion, this sense of mental and emotional instability in our communities, in our families, and even in ourselves. So I wanted us to take a fresh look at who Jesus was, what he taught, and how he lived his life. Before we dive in, I do want to give my friends here in the room with me an opportunity just to share their first name and where they are this evening as part of our community. And I didn't really set aside who was going to go first. So I'm going to end up calling your names, which is one of those fun things. Keith, could you share with us?
Sure. Dale, I'm Keith, and I'm in San Diego in the Rancho Penasquitos community.
Thank you, Keith. Shelley?
Hi, I'm Shelley. I am in the Mira Mesa area of San Diego.
And Laura? Need to unmute, Laura.
I'm Laura, and I'm in Fort Worth, Texas.
Fantastic. Which just leaves one person.
And I'm Leslie, and I'm in New York City, Brooklyn, to be exact.
Great, great. And I'm in San Diego as well, at the other wing of the amazing estate, the Suggs estate. Shelley's at the far west wing. I'm at the far east wing of our 2-bedroom apartment. So it's so good to be here with you and sharing with you. We may have a few more friends for Beloved who join us as we go along. Now, as we get together, I want to kind of share some rules, really, a way that we can interact with each other. I am going to pause for questions at particular points along the way, and questions and comments, ideas, feelings about what we're talking about. But I want to encourage my friends here in the room with me to interrupt, to ask a question, share an idea, take us in a direction where you feel moved by the Spirit to go into. I very much believe in open sharing and relying upon the wisdom of the community, not just upon the work I've done getting ready for the evening. Now, you don't have the opportunity to offer a question verbally, but I am monitoring our Facebook feed. You can put a question there in the comments section. I don't know if we'll get to them or to all of them, but I do want to know what's on your mind and on your heart. so that I can learn and see how I might better open up the scripture and the story of who Jesus is in a way that encourages you and speaks to where you are in your life. Because I think that's what gospel is all about. The power of the gospels, the power of the story of Jesus. I said, I believe it's just utterly relevant now more than ever. Probably could be said at every moment in time along this history that we've shared, because the stories, the teachings, the witness, the person of Jesus is relevant and speaks to how we can live our lives and make a difference in the world, uplifting ourselves, finding compassion for ourselves, and finding compassion for the world around us. Well, tonight, we're going to encounter Jesus and talk about his relevance here and now, this time and this place, through the story of Jesus as told in the Gospel of Mark. Now, I've chosen Mark because the importance of Mark's gospel just cannot be underestimated. Mark is the first gospel written. And as the first gospel written, Mark sets the architecture for the other gospels, particularly Matthew and Luke. In other words, the writers of Matthew and Luke have a copy of Mark's gospel in hand as they write. And the general direction of the story follows Mark's telling of the story, and all of his material is in those other two gospels. You just can't underestimate the power of the Gospel of Mark. I've also chosen Mark because Mark is my favorite gospel, and I got to choose. So there you go. My study of the Gospel of Mark has led me to believe that it was written probably to the church at Rome, sometime between 64 and 70 of the Common Era. That's AD for most folks, but CE is a new way of talking about the Common Era we share. And you may remember that 64 is the time of the first great persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire. History records that in the summer of 64, as much as 70% of the city of Rome was consumed by fire that raged out of control for 7 days. Now, survivors believe that the Emperor Nero himself set the blaze either for monetary gain or for his own amusement. Now, historical evidence is very unclear if Nero was to blame for the fire or not. Either way, Nero, being Nero, found a way to use the fires to his own political advantage. You see, within the empire, particularly around Rome, there was an obscure and secretive religious sect that had been gaining strength. Nero wants to quell their growth, and by drawing attention to this sect, push attention away from himself. So Nero blamed the fire on this group that were often called Christians. Christianus. And according to the first century Roman historian Tacitus, Nero began by arresting a few members of the sect, and then under torture, they would implicate others in the crime, spreading the word that the Christians had burned Rome. Nero created this huge resentment against these Christians. And according to Tacitus, the Christians, I'm going to read this very carefully. The Christians were mercilessly hunted down and put to death. Christians were convicted not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against humankind. They were covered with the skins of beasts and torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt. It is this historical backdrop where we meet Mark, the Gospel of Mark. And I want to join my voice with the stream of biblical scholars who believe that Mark's Gospel was first an oral tradition, which means that Mark's Gospel was meant to be a sermon, not an essay. It was a sermon preached to the persecuted Christians of Rome, who for their own protection were worshiping in secret in the subterranean tunnels where the Christians buried their dead, the catacombs under Rome. Historians record that because of the Christian interest in preserving the bodies of believers and the shortage of land around Rome, Christians dug tunnels with niches along the wall to place their loved ones. And I like just to share an image of that, get a sense of what that might look like. That's always the problem, getting it to dance. Okay, now maybe you'll advance. Okay. I do always love it when the issue will not advance for me. So I'm going to stop screen and do this a little bit differently. I do apologize. And we're going to go here, share, here, from
to ever be enough for this existence. When did it get so hard? Your heart is beating, alive and breathing, and there's a reason why you are essential, not accidental, and you should realize you are beloved.
Okay. Well, I'm not having much luck here, which is sad for me. So I'm going to take just a minute to see if I can get this to work, because there's some things I think you need to see in order to understand the context and where we're going. So let's see here. We're going to, okay, and escape from here. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, now, where are y'all? We'll give it a try, see what happens. I still keep going to the first slide. There we go. I think I know what I was doing wrong, actually. This is an image of one of the catacombs under Rome. I had the great opportunity back when I was in college to make a trip to Rome and to walk through these catacombs. Now, by the end of the 5th century, there were over 375 miles of passageways that existed underneath Rome. Can you imagine that? 75 miles of these passageways where they would put the bodies of their loved ones. And beyond the passageways, there would be small niche areas cut out. These were kind of small family chapels within the catacombs. And it is within the catacombs that we see the first images of Christian art. And these images are, I'm an art history buff. We could spend all night just there. But I want us to move on and consider the possibility that the only sanctuaries for the church at Rome were within the catacombs underneath it. I want to pause for questions just to get a sense of where people are and understanding the historical context from which the Gospel of Mark comes. Any thoughts or questions?
So I have a question.
Sure.
Were they worshiping in the catacombs after they had already buried their dead, or?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
One of the advantages of being there is that most Romans wouldn't go there because the dead were there. But the Christians who had this reverence for the bodies of their loved ones who had passed found a place that they would go anyway to be with their loved ones, to talk with them, to understand the history of their families. And so for them to be down there was a very safe place for them to be, because no one was going to come looking for them down in the catacombs except for other Christians. Great question. This context, this sense that the Gospel of Mark happened subterranean, it kind of changes the way we hear it, doesn't it? And, because at our best, we don't read the Gospel of Mark. We preach it and we hear it deep in our bones. That's how it would have been experienced by those first Christians. Let me see if I can pull this off because I want you to see this. Imagine that you are part of a small gathering of Jesus followers who are huddled together under the city of Rome. Here in the dark, cold, and dank, illuminated only by candles whose dancing flames cast ever-moving shadows on the wall and the ceiling, surrounded by the remains of their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters, the Christians gather in fear. Fear that one of those empty niches on the wall would soon be occupied by their own bodies. It just kind of changes things. It brings in drama. It brings in a sense of passion and sharing this gospel to these people who were in desperate need of some good news. Thoughts, questions, feelings?
It's pretty spooky.
Yeah.
It's good setting for October with Halloween.
It is kind of an October setting. Most definitely.
Were the bodies actually, I was noticing in that picture you showed us, were they actually though enclosed, or were they open to
They were open.
Oh, wow.
They were open. The bodies would have been embalmed in some way. I don't really know. I don't know much about that process, and I really shouldn't just go there, but they would have been open. You would see the bodies, the bones, the clothing. For the rest of our time together tonight, I'm going to use that backdrop of the Gospel of Mark being a sermon preached to a church who is gathered in fear. I'm going to use that backdrop to talk about how Jesus' message and the way he lived his life through his ministry is relevant for where we are right now in our lives here in the United States. Here and now, this time, this place. And I think it is so relevant because there are two characteristics of Mark's portrayal of Jesus, two characteristics of the message and the sermon that Mark preaches. And I want to share those with you and help you get a sense of what they might have meant for Mark's congregation. The first reason, the first characteristic that I want to focus on is urgency. Jesus' message and the way he lived out his ministry was done with great urgency. Now, if I can get the technology to work right, I'm going to put up a conglomeration of phrases from the Gospel of Mark that I found in various translations of the Bible. You know, the RSV, NRSV, NIV, NEB, NASB. You know, there's so many 3- and 4-letter versions of the Bible right now that you can find little differences in how the Greek, this would originally been written in Greek, how the Greek is translated into English. And I want to show you some of that variety. Okay. And see if we can get this to advance. No, it's not going to do it that way. We'll have to do it the hard way. Okay. And where are y'all? I'm just going to learn to do it the hard way because it's faster doing it that way from this point. Okay, from the current slide. And these are some of the phrases that you'll find just from Mark chapter 1. As you're looking at those different versions of the Bible, you will see words like just when, at once, immediately, as soon as, when, just then, quickly, straight, right away, instantly, without delay. I mean, you find these in the midst of just this chapter, this sense of timing as it's being set up. In verse 10, just when he was coming up out of the water. Verse 12, at once the Spirit impelled him to go. In verse 18, immediately they left their nets and followed. Verse 20, as soon as he called them. Verse 21, when Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and began to teach. Verse 23, just then there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit. 28, to spread quickly throughout. 29, they went straight to the house. 30, about her right away. 42, instantly the leprosy left. 43, sent him away without delay. Without delay. You see, these phrases aren't bad. We get a sense that things are moving along, but the problem with these phrases is that they're written as if the Gospel of Mark is an essay. It's not. And we're taught in school that a good essay uses a variety of words to express a single idea. You know, that's the way why high school English students quickly learn that using the same word over and over in an essay will push their grade further and further along the alphabet. A, B, C, D, F. You know, I can remember in high school at night, late at night, and even in college, thumbing through a thesaurus Anybody remember the actual book where you would look up the different words that meant the same thing? And, I would search its pages and rack my brains and even call friends in the middle of the night trying to find some new and different way to say something as simple as, well, the word simple. You see, if you've already used these words, clear, uncomplicated, cinch, easy, easy as pie, a piece of cake, a picnic, a snap, no problem, no sweat, no big deal, no worries. Anybody can do it. It's child's play, easier than falling off a log. You're calling a friend in the middle of the night and see if they have any other way of saying simple, because you want that grade. You want the essay to be just right. But the Gospel of Mark is not an essay. It's a sermon. It's a theatric presentation. It's an impassioned plea. It's a voice of one crying in the wilderness. It's a call out of the darkness. And when you want to drive a point home, repetition will work. 57 years ago, August 28th, 1963, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial before 200,000 people in desperate need of inspiration. They were living in darkness. They needed good news. Imagine if Dr. King had stood there and offered his famous speech by saying, "I have a thought. I have an idea. I have a belief. I have an image. I have an impression. I have a mental picture. I have a premonition." Can you imagine the "I have a dream" speech written as an essay? It's a sermon with one word repeated over and over again to help people enter into the very drama. Remember all those words that I put up on the screen? Straight away, immediately, then. All of those words in the Gospel of Mark are the same word. The word is euthus. It literally means straight away or immediately. It's used 60 times in the New Testament. 41 of those times is in the Gospel of Mark. 11 times in the first chapter. In a word, in one word, good news is being preached to the people in darkness. God acts immediately, 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 immediately. That's all in the very first chapter. How are we doing? Okay.
So Dale, it's interesting that Mark is, of course, the shortest gospel, and what you're describing now makes me think that perhaps it's short, it's to the point. There's not a lot of dressing on it. It's just the facts, bang, bang, bang.
Mm-hmm. It moves right along.
Moves
People
right
need
along.
something here and now. And it's a sermon. He's going to try to do this all in one sitting with people in the catacombs. We don't know how it developed over time, but the preaching of it would have been so powerful. You see, Mark confronts his hearers with one word over and over and over again. Those same phrases I did before. And straight away, Jesus came up. And straight away, the Spirit impelled him. And straight away, they left their nets. And straight away, he called them. And straight away on the Sabbath. And straight away, there was a man. And straight away, his fame spread. And straight away, they left the synagogue. And straight away, they told him about her. And straight away, the leprosy left him. And straight away, he sent him away. this chorus over and over and over. The people are learning that God acts now. See, Mark's contingent is huddled in the dark and the cold and the dank of the catacombs. Remember that description, illuminated only by candles whose dancing flames cast ever-moving shadows on the walls and ceiling, fearing for their faith, fearing for their safety, fearing for their lives. The preacher looked into their faces and he knew that they didn't need something down the road in the sweet by and by. They needed something right here, right now. And that's what he gave them. He gave them inspiration and strength and faith and hope and love and grace. And most of all, he gave them the undeniable truth that in Jesus Christ, God was and is and always will be present with them each and every day, every hour, every moment, immediately, straight away. Euthus. That urgency of Mark's gospel, the urgency of Jesus' message and life in Mark's gospel, I believe that's what we need now. We need a sense of urgency about sharing the message, about being the message, about helping people to understand that God is not about what will happen in heaven. God in Jesus, according to Mark, is about what's happening right now. And Mark's gospel says, what are you going to do about it? If God is with you right now, if God is immediately in your presence, will you walk with God in being Jesus' hands and feet in the world?
I'm
Probably should pause.
thinking of something. The energy that you're sharing, but also the sense of the repetition, and the sort of the power that comes with that. It occurs to me, I'm starting to visualize people in the streets, even though we're down in the catacombs. But when you talk about what do we need right here and now, and when people get moving, there's this sort of chant, style of communication that starts to develop among the people of that are trying to make their message heard now, and to just keep repeating it over and over, the same words, chanting what it is that needs to be heard, and with the desire to break through and make change and get people to follow and join in. The power of that is what's the image that's coming to my mind.
Yeah. And the chant through this gospel is just now.
Mm-hmm.
God is here now. You are not alone.
It kind of reminds me of, I went to a few protests like over the summer, and we would chant the same things over and over and over. And it was just like, it was just so powerful. And I don't know, it reminded me of that.
Mm-hmm. 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 Now, this powerful, emphatic chorus within Mark's gospel is wrapped around stories and teachings of compassion and grace and including the people on the margins and standing up for people whom the establishment has condemned. Sounds a lot like something we could use right now. Well, there is one other characteristic within the gospel which I think makes it so utterly relevant here and now, this time, this place. And I first said urgency. The second one is the depiction of Jesus as a man of action. Actually, when I first envisioned a Bible around the Gospel of Mark, that's what I called it, Jesus, man of action. Decided to move away from that particular title because it didn't capture everything, but there's this action and you may not have noticed in the rhythm of the Gospel of Mark, there's like a drumbeat of word and action, word and action, word and action. All too often we think of Jesus as this prophetic teacher. He's a teller of stories and parables. He's the shepherd of the lost sheep, someone who can look into the face of another, somehow know what's going on deep in their very depths. And then he would speak a word that that man or woman or child or family or synagogue or religious or political group, Jesus would look into their very being and see what they needed, and he would speak this word that would inspire them to faith. And we have that image of Jesus, the gentle teacher. How many of us grew up in a place, those of you who grew up in churches, where there might have been, the church I served in Indiana was perfect. On this window over here to this side of the church was a picture of Jesus, the Good Shepherd. He has a sheep around his neck, a little sheep by his side. He's got his staff, and he's looking so very peaceful and calm and reverent. The other window is Jesus at Gethsemane on his knees, praying to God, this light coming from heaven. There are these static, pastoral images of Jesus, and certainly that's some of what Jesus is. But in Mark's gospel, all that teaching, all that storytelling, all those parables, all the searching and speaking the poignant word is always followed with an action. Just look at the first chapter of Mark. Jesus proclaims, "The time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news." He picks up the message of John and begins to proclaim it. He says this, and then immediately Euthus calls his disciples. Jesus teaches in the synagogue, and then immediately Euthus, he casts out an unclean spirit. Jesus went to the home of Simon and Andrew and began to teach them. Then immediately he healed Simon's mother-in-law. Jesus shares the meal with his disciples. We don't know what they talked about. I wish I did. They had just been called. They had just come into that being. They share that meal, and then immediately Jesus goes out of the house, and they're bringing the sick and those who are afflicted with demons from all over the countryside, and he heals them from sunset until deep into the night. In the morning, Jesus goes to a lonely place to pray. When his disciples find him, the text says, then immediately Jesus and his disciples went out into Galilee, proclaiming the message and then casting out demons. In the Gospel of Mark, there is this rhythm, this drumbeat of the good news. Teach, then act. Heal, then act. Speak, then act. Tell a story, then act. Share a parable, then act. Reveal something about the very nature of the kingdom of God, then act. This is the rhythm of the Gospel of Mark. Urgent teaching, word, I should say, word, then action. Does that make sense? Are you getting a sense of that? The kind of rhythm that goes throughout this gospel. It's fun just to watch. You don't notice it. And particularly when you're reading in English and you got all those, the youth who shows up in all those different words, and it doesn't get that sense of urgency. But in the Greek, it is so powerful and so poetic and so fluid, from word to action, word to action. And it speaks to those people who are in the catacombs, in the darkness, in need. And I think it speaks to us at this moment in our lives here in this country. I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions, concerns, what's coming to mind, and then we're going to go into the final stretch here.
I have a question.
Sure.
Why do you think he chose action and like immediately that type of word for this particular audience when they do, like when they are feeling so like hopeless and, you know, like I guess I'm asking, why did he choose that instead of God is with you, or you can feel God around you, or God is like healer or protector or something like that?
Great
I'm just
question.
curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, great question. What first comes to mind is kind of an inspirational talk at the halftime of a football game. That's utterly trivial, and it doesn't capture it, but it's Martin Luther King Jr. on the steps. It's the call to action. It's the trust that God is with you. There is a dream. There is a future. There is a beloved community that can come into being. It can be real. It can be tangible, and it will be when we understand the teachings of Jesus and how he helps us kind of come to the sense of who we are, and then we put that understanding into action. That's what first comes to mind. There are 3 endings to the Gospel of Mark, and we're used to just reading all the way through the 3rd ending. But the first ending of the Gospel of Mark has the women going to the tomb. They find it empty, and they run away and don't tell anyone anything because they were afraid. Period. That's the end of the sermon. Why in the world would the preacher of Mark end there? Editors hated it so much that they added stuff after. Now, it was just so unnerving. They didn't tell anybody anything. Surely that's not what happened. They went and told the disciples, and they went back and they found things, and then Jesus appeared to them on the mountain. The original ending, they went away, told nobody anything because they were afraid. Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, the other thing, Mark being short, like I mentioned earlier, what it's really missing, some of the things that make it short compared to the other Gospels is there's no there's no birth narrative, and there's no resurrection, post-resurrection sightings, right? Except for that, the very little that gets tacked on. And I'm thinking while you're talking about words, action, the words actions occur during Jesus's ministry, and then crucifixion, and those other pieces don't fit in nearly as nicely to words action.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, you're right. A long birth narrative does not help the urgency
Right.
of the message or the heart of the message that God is with you and active with you in this time. Laura, you were reaching for mute. Did you have something you wanted? You're on mute at this point. You're still on mute. There you go.
Yeah, it finally does it every once in a while. No, I can see exactly that point, that, you know, it's not as relevant. It's proof that something extraordinary has happened, but it doesn't add to his central message that we've got to act on what Jesus was like during his lifetime.
Yeah. See,
You know what comes to,
Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
add? I want to add on. I'm I work with elementary school kids, and this is a strategy that I use in my work to get kids to speak. It's called fill in the blank or a sentence starter, and you set up a pattern. And then you do the first part, and you want the child to come back with the second part. So to me, the ending here is, this is what's happened. Now, what's your response? Fill in the blank. You need to act. Then, because if it's word, act, the word is, they found the tomb empty. Now, what's the action? That's the piece I get from that.
Mhm. I think that's right in line for where this gospel writer wants to go. You know, the writer of Matthew has a different audience in mind. Primarily a church that is converted, people have converted from Judaism. So a lot of the birth narrative in Matthew is to show that Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises of Scripture in the Hebrew Scriptures. And Luke wants to tell a whole story. Luke and Acts, those two books, Luke and the Acts of the Apostles, it is a 2-volume story. And in that story, there's a real emphasis on proof that Jesus lived and acted and is still active. Here's a witness, here's a witness, here's a witness after Jesus was gone. It is written primarily to a Greek audience. And it's written in very high Greek, as a learned audience. Mark's is real straightforward, real common language, real word action. And Shelley's right, he just ends. They were afraid. If they don't tell anybody, if they don't do anything, Jesus' life was for nothing. We gain nothing. God cannot act in this world using Jesus as that catalyst. You in the catacombs, you're afraid. When you leave here, what will you do? What will you say? Yeah, left this huge blank. And like I said before, it was so unnerving that the editors of Scripture just couldn't leave it alone. This was the response. And
Well, sometimes that's how movies are, those movies that just stop all of a sudden and you're like, wait, what? You can't stop there. But the filmmaker is wanting you to have that reaction of what's your response going to be.
Mhm. I want to show you something that's connected to this. And it's part of why I think the urgency and this rhythm of word and action is relevant to how we're trying to live through these times. And because I've learned that my screen doesn't like me, I'm going to take just a minute to set it up the hard way, so I don't have to do it twice. So hold on. Okay. And where are they? There they are. Yes, good. And from current slide. Come on. There we go. You may have remembered from the core values of Beloved. They were grace, inclusion, and compassion. And when we talk about compassion at Beloved, it has a specific definition, and this is it. It comes from Frank Rogers Jr., a wonderful professor and teacher at Claremont Theological School. His definition is this: compassion is being moved in one's depths by the pain or bliss of another and responding in ways that intend to ease their suffering and promote their flourishing. Now, empathy, there's all this research going on right now within the universities, particularly in the California systems, on empathy and compassion. So I want to work with some of that research for just a minute. Empathy is that being moved in one's depths, part of the definition. Being moved in one's depths by the pain or bliss of another. That's empathy. Action is responding to ease that suffering or promote their flourishing. In a way, it's kind of the rhythm of Mark. It's the word, the being moved, the inspiration, and then acting on that inspiration, being moved in one's depths by the pain or bliss of another, or the pain or the joy of an entire society in struggling, being moved by that, but then acting, responding to ease the suffering and to promote flourishing. When both of those happen, that's compassion. An action doesn't have to be a compassionate action, even when it helps somebody. And empathy without action ends up pretty much being sentimentality. It doesn't create change in people's lives. Compassion is empathy in action. We, for a very long time, have heard this phrase, compassion fatigue. In the midst of all this research going on, particularly in the California university systems in compassion, what they have decided is that compassion fatigue doesn't exist. There is no such thing. Now, we've been taught about forever. People who are helpers, they're nurses, they're ministers, they're social workers, they get totally burnt out, and we call this the sense of compassion fatigue. Research says no. We may get tired when we're truly doing compassion, when we are feeling that empathy and acting on it. We may get tired, but it's a good kind of tired. It's like when you've gone for a jog or you've lifted weights and your muscles are sore, but you feel good about what you've accomplished. What does exist is empathy fatigue. Anyone here just tired of listening to the news? The pain that's being shared, the witness constantly happening of folks who are part of that, the COVID tragedy. They're part of the polarization and the pain it's causing them and their families. They are part of this social unrest, which is underneath everything right now. And if we think about it, if we let that stuff in, if we talk to these people and understand what's going on with them, we just feel ourselves being crushed by the load. Empathy fatigue does exist. You get out of it by putting that empathy into action, using that being moved to reach out to ease someone's suffering or promote their flourishing. Straight away, immediately, euthus. I'm looking at what's going on in our world, and I've talked with people who are struggling with what's going on, and I can see the pain and the weight that they're holding. And I think of Jesus. I've always wondered, how did Jesus take in all of that? The people hurting, the people possessed, the people who are sick, the people who are lost and without a shepherd, the people who are following false teachers. He's seeing all of that. How could he hold all that pain? He acted. Mark makes it very clear. He gets the pain, acts on it, feels the hurt, acts on it, sees the disease, acts on it, is moved from his depths, then acts on it. I think Mark's gospel gives us a blueprint about how to get through the times in which we're living. When you feel that weight, feel it, be moved by it, but don't just hang on to it. Act on it. I think that makes all the difference. And it's amazing to me that scientific research in 2020 is confirming what the writer of Mark knew in 64. We're pretty much close to our time. Any thoughts or questions about that empathy action? That's what compassion is. And I think that's what when we follow the example of Jesus, that's what we do.
I'll say something. When you brought up, feeling that sense of just that heavy feeling when you're feeling empathetic, that just weighs on you. Mm-hmm. Maybe the people that are actually empathetic, they start to feel some sort of guilt from not acting on it. And perhaps that is like that feeling, that heavy feeling it's that guilt, like wearing away. And what you said, like acting on it, it goes away. Mm-hmm. You feel like you're doing something, helping others. Yeah.
And an interesting thing about what Jesus does in the Gospel of Mark particularly, when Jesus acts, he doesn't try to fix the whole problem. He doesn't take on himself the need to make everything right. He picks one person and changes their life. I think that's a helpful strategy for us. Part of the weight is that what can I do to possibly help the situation? Well, there's a person a person you're going to encounter, a person that some agency knows, that you can use your passion, your empathy, your being moved in your depths to help that one person. It will transform their lives and it will transform yours. Don't try to fix the whole thing. Other thoughts?
I think that's a really powerful like image that Jesus, just fixes one, person at a time, because like that's what a lot of activists and stuff will say, is that, there'll be popularity amongst protesting and things happening, but then people feel paralyzed and what else can I do? It's too big. And then it like loses momentum because people, don't act for whatever reason to make changes.
Mhm. Mhm. Systemic racism. Man, it's been with us from the beginning in this country. I can't change that all by myself, but I can build a relationship with somebody who is different than me. And in that relationship, find a way to help each other. Hunger. I was teaching junior high youth back in 1984 about the Hunger Project and how if there was the political will on this planet, we could feed everybody because there was so much abundance. That is still true today. I can't take on the Hunger Project.